You were gone only 3 days, Mom. We thought you didn't need those things anymore. I stood in the doorway, looking at the bare shelves that once held a life's worth of small meanings. My voice stayed calm. Is that so? If you're listening, subscribe and tell me where you're from. Some absences teach you who was really waiting. My name is Dorothy Whitmore, and I'm 71 years old. I've lived in the same modest house on the edge of Asheville, North Carolina, for nearly 4 decades. The front porch creaks, the kitchen tiles are uneven, and the walls carry the soft echoes of laughter that used to fill them. When my husband, Frank, passed 2 years ago, the silence settled like dust, quiet, familiar, but heavy in certain corners. I still catch myself setting 2 cups on the counter some mornings, forgetting that one will stay untouched. Frank and I built this home together, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. He was an electrician with a habit of humming old gospel tunes while he worked. I was a nurse for 35 years at the local hospital. Our life wasn't grand, but it was steady, and steadiness can be its own kind of wealth. Every Sunday, we'd walk to the temple at the edge of town, the one with white lotus carvings along the gate. Faith wasn't about superstition for us, it was about rhythm, about remembering to pause. After Frank's passing, that temple became my anchor. The women there, most of them widows too, understand the language of quiet resilience. We light candles for those we've lost, share small meals, and sometimes just sit together, saying nothing. My daughter, Linda Hayes, says I'm too sentimental for my own good. She's 45, a realtor who always walks fast and talks faster, as if peace were a thing she could schedule. My son, Robert Hayes, is 42, runs a small car dealership, and thinks worry is love disguised as responsibility. Between them, I have a granddaughter, Emma, 17, gentle, still untouched by the weight of grown-up disappointment. They visit, but not the way they used to. After Frank died, our dinners grew shorter, our conversations more practical. They began to talk about preparing for the future, about simplifying my affairs. I know what those words mean when children say them to an aging parent. They mean protection, yes, but also control. I told myself their concern came from care, not convenience. I wanted to believe that. Last month, the temple announced a 3-day women's retreat in the mountains, a time for silence and reflection. I hadn't been away overnight since Frank's funeral, so it felt like something my spirit needed. I told Linda and Robert I'd be gone from Friday morning to Sunday afternoon. They both encouraged it. You deserve some peace, Mom, Linda said. Don't worry about a thing. I smiled, believing her. Before I left, I walked through the house like I always do, watering the fern by the window, checking the locks, polishing Frank's old watch that still ticks faintly when I hold it near my ear. In the bedroom, I placed my jewelry box beneath the dresser, where it's always been, and set a small envelope with my safe deposit key in the drawer beside it. These weren't riches, just memories made tangible. The retreat was beautiful, 3 days without talking, surrounded by mist and bells and the smell of sandalwood. I prayed for clarity, not comfort. Sometimes they arrive together, sometimes they don't. On the 3rd afternoon, as we drove back toward town, I felt lighter than I had in months. The kind of light that comes when the world stops asking for anything. When I walked into my house, the air felt wrong. It wasn't messy, but it wasn't mine. The bookshelf near the window was empty, except for a few picture frames stacked face down. The kitchen counter was lined with boxes labeled donation. Even the teacups were gone from their hooks. I stood there, half smiling, waiting for one of them to appear and say it was a misunderstanding. Instead, Linda emerged from the hallway with a clipboard in her hand. "Oh, you're back early," she said. Her tone was casual, rehearsed. Behind her, Robert lifted a cardboard box and avoided my eyes. It took me a moment to realize what had happened. My things, Frank's watch, my wedding china, the silver bracelet Emma gave me last Christmas, had been sorted into categories. Donate, keep, discard, Linda said softly. We thought you'd want a fresh start. I could feel my pulse steady but slow. A fresh start? I asked. Yes, she said. You'll feel lighter once the clutter's gone. I didn't argue. I simply looked around the room that once held 40 years of ordinary love and said, I see you've been busy. Then I walked into my bedroom and closed the door. Later, when they were gone, I opened my drawer and found the small envelope missing, the one that held the key to my safe deposit box. When I woke the next morning, the house still felt too clean, like a stranger's version of order. I made tea, but the sound of the kettle only reminded me of how empty the shelves looked. The framed photographs that once lined the hall were gone, replaced by faint rectangles of dust where memories used to hang. My chest tightened, not with anger, but with the kind of ache that comes when something sacred is handled by unknowing hands. I sat by the kitchen table and studied the small gaps left on the wall, the way you'd read an old scar. Every mark had a story. The one from when Robert's toy car hit the plaster, the faint one higher up from where Frank leaned to hang the last picture before his heart gave out. None of that could be boxed, labeled, or donated. Yet, my children had managed to remove it all with the efficiency of realtors cleaning a listing. When I finally checked my dresser, my suspicion became certainty. The envelope that held my safe deposit key was gone. I opened every drawer twice, pretending it might have slipped somewhere, but I already knew who had taken it. The absence wasn't random, it was selective. Only the items that carried value, either emotional or monetary, had disappeared. At 10 that morning, I called Linda. Her voice was bright, almost rehearsed. "Morning, Mom." "Settling back in?" I said quietly. I noticed a few things missing. A pause followed, then a sigh too controlled to be guiltless. "We just tried to help. You've been talking about simplifying, and we thought." I cut her off gently. "You thought I wouldn't notice?" "No," she said, her tone softening. "We thought you'd understand." I didn't answer. I simply thanked her for watering the plants and hung up. The calm in my voice wasn't forgiveness. It was discipline, the same kind that gets a nurse through a night shift, or a widow through another sunrise. I dressed, locked the house, and drove to Blue Ridge Community Bank. The teller recognized me. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore. How can we help you today?" I told her I needed to access my safe deposit box. She checked her records, then looked up, surprised. "It was opened recently, 2 days ago, actually, by your co-signer, Mrs. Hayes." My stomach sank, but I managed to keep my tone even. "Was anything removed?" "I can't disclose contents," she said apologetically, "but I can print the access log for you." She handed me a sheet showing Linda's signature and the date Saturday, 11:42 a.m., the same day I was meditating in silence at the temple. I folded the paper and thanked her. Outside, I stood in the parking lot, the log burning like a confession in my hand. It wasn't the money that hurt, it was the timing. They hadn't waited even a day before deciding what I no longer needed. That evening, Robert stopped by. He carried takeout and tried to make conversation about Emma's college plans. I waited until he set the containers down before saying, "Your sister visited my safe deposit box." His eyes flickered, a brief flinch he tried to hide with a shrug. "She told me. We were sorting things out early, just to avoid confusion later." "Later?" I asked softly. "You mean when I'm gone?" He looked away. "You know we love you, Mom. We just don't want you to worry about all this paperwork." "Then why didn't you ask me?" I asked. His silence was answer enough. After he left, I went through the documents on the kitchen counter. There, half tucked under a pile of receipts, I found a printed draft titled "Transfer of Ownership, Whitmore Residence." My name appeared at the top, already typed, with a blank space for my signature. I held it under the lamp, the light trembling faintly over the paper, and realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan one made under the soft disguise of care. I placed the property draft beside the bank log, then sat down at my desk. From the drawer, I pulled out a new notebook and wrote on the first page, October 3rd, returned from the temple, house altered, key missing, family moved without consent. Begin record. I closed it and whispered to Frank's photograph, "Looks like I'll need your steadiness again." The next morning, I decided I wouldn't confront anyone yet. Truth, I've learned, deserves preparation. Instead, I would begin where faith and fact meet at the bank, the paper, and the silence between what people say and what they choose not to. I woke before sunrise, the air heavy with the smell of rain and dust. I made a list before the kettle even whistled, dates, names, and the one word that had started to shape my thoughts: proof. When emotion starts to spin its stories, I've learned to let facts hold the pen. At 9 sharp, I drove back to Blue Ridge Community Bank, the access log folded neatly in my purse. The manager, a gray-haired man named Mr. Kerrigan, greeted me kindly. "Mrs. Whitmore, what can I do for you?" he asked. I explained that I needed to verify an unauthorized entry. His expression shifted, careful now. "Yes, I see here. Mrs. Hayes accessed your box with her key. She's listed as your secondary on file." He paused. "Do you wish to revoke that?" I nodded. "Immediately." He printed a new authorization form. As I signed it, I noticed the faint tremor in my hand and steadied it. When he slid the paper back, he added, "There's a note that one item was retrieved a sealed envelope." That was my husband's letter, the one Frank had written a month before his surgery. I thanked him, smiled, and walked out before my composure could falter. In the car, I sat with my eyes closed, remembering the letter's weight, its blue ink fading slightly with time. He'd written that everything we owned should remain, for the one who remembers why it was earned. I wondered if Linda had even read it, or simply seen paper and thought, value. That afternoon, I stopped by Robert's dealership. He was outside, speaking with a customer, and his salesman's smile faltered when he saw me. "Mom, this isn't a good time," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "It rarely is," I replied gently. "I just came to ask whether you knew about the letter." His eyes narrowed. "What letter?" "The one your father left in the deposit box." He exhaled slowly. "Mom, you're making this bigger than it is. We just needed to check what was there, that's all." I watched his face carefully. "Did you find what you were looking for?" He hesitated. "Linda handled it." I drove home quietly, noticing for the first time that the for sale sign in front of the vacant house across the street had the same logo as Linda's realty firm. The coincidence didn't sit right. Inside, I found another clue, an envelope half tucked under the printer tray. It was a notarized draft of a living property, wire transfer, pre-filled with my name, Linda's signature, and a witness line left blank. The date was the day before I returned from the temple. I photocopied everything, slipped the copies into a folder, and labeled it For Truth. Later that evening, I visited the temple to clear my thoughts. Helen Kearns, a woman I'd prayed beside for years, noticed me sitting alone. "Dorothy, you look as though your heart's sorting puzzles," she said, taking a seat. I smiled faintly. "It seems my family's done some organizing without me." She raised a brow. "Financial or emotional?" "Both," I said. Helen used to work as an accountant before retirement, meticulous and patient. I showed her the property document and the access log. She studied them, tapping her finger lightly. "This is pre-probate," she said finally. "It's not legal unless a court declares you incapacitated." "Did they tell you they filed for guardianship?" My breath caught. "No, they told me to rest." Helen's eyes softened. "Rest, yes, but not surrender." We agreed to meet again the next day, to review everything carefully. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house seemed to hum with new awareness, the kind that makes even floorboards seem complicit. I walked room to room, touching the spaces they'd cleared, the bookshelf, the dresser, the empty jewelry case, and whispered, "This isn't clutter. This is history." The next morning, I returned to the bank to request a full statement. Mr. Kerrigan handed me the transaction log. There it was, 2 withdrawals made from my savings account that week. $2,600 and $3,400, both signed by Linda under joint authorization. I didn't confront her yet. Instead, I placed the papers into the folder and made a copy of everything at the library. By afternoon, I had my 2 truth props, the bank slip and the property draft. I arranged them neatly on the table, then opened my notebook and wrote, "October 5th, they have the means, the motive, and the paperwork, but they've forgotten who taught them honesty." That evening, I called Helen again. "You were right," I said. "They've started without the law's permission." She replied calmly, "Then we'll finish it with the law's protection." I looked at Frank's photo above the mantel and whispered, "You'd be proud of the way I'm holding steady." For the first time in days, the tremor in my hand stilled. Proof, I thought, was beginning to replace disbelief. Helen arrived the next morning, carrying a canvas tote and her old reading glasses. "I brought the good pen," she said, settling at my kitchen table like someone preparing for court rather than conversation. She'd always been that way, steady, precise, a woman who believed that paper told truth better than people. I poured her coffee and laid out the folder. "I've been writing everything down," I said. She smiled approvingly. "Good. A record is stronger than memory." We went through the documents one by one, the bank slips, the property draft, the notarized signature page. Helen read slowly, lips pursed. They've used the template for early transfer of estate, she said finally. Illegal without your consent, but common when families assume control before they're asked. I sighed. They said it was to make things easier later. She looked up. Later is often code for when you can't fight back. I felt a quiet ache under my ribs but said nothing. Helen reached across the table and touched my wrist. Dorothy, I've seen this before. It starts as fear of burden, fear of loss, fear of time running out. But fear doesn't excuse theft. Her tone was kind but firm, the way nurses speak before delivering bad news. I nodded. I don't want to punish them. I just want to make sure they can't do it again. She pulled a legal pad from her bag. Then let's build a sequence. We'll gather evidence, confirm dates, and notify the right institutions. She began writing as she spoke. Step 1, secure what's left, change the locks, hide the valuables. Step 2, request a statement from the bank manager confirming unauthorized access. Step 3, meet with the county clerk to check for any property filings. Step 4, contact a senior legal clinic. They'll help you free of charge. I watched her list form in neat lines. You make it sound almost simple, I said. It is, she replied, until feelings get in the way. So let's promise each other something: you won't confront them until you have everything you need. I agreed. No anger, I said. Just clarity. By afternoon, we'd driven to the post office to make certified copies of every document. Helen insisted on sealing each set in labeled envelopes: bank evidence, property draft, correspondence log. As she worked, she hummed softly, a habit she said she'd picked up during tax season years ago. It keeps the mind from drifting, she explained. Emotion hides in silence. On the way back, we stopped at the temple. She lit a candle beside mine, both flames small but steady. You know, she said, it's not about what they took, it's about what you teach them by how you respond. I nodded. Frank used to say the same. That strength isn't loud, it's consistent. Helen smiled faintly. Then let's be consistent. That evening, I locked the house for the first time, with both doors bolted. I placed the folders inside a small suitcase under the bed. Before closing it, I added one more thing: a photograph of Frank holding Emma when she was a baby, his smile wide, his hands certain. I whispered, "We're handling it." The next morning, Helen called. I checked the county records online, she said. No filing yet, but they've printed the forms. You were right to act fast. I thanked her. I'll go to the senior legal clinic tomorrow. She paused before hanging up. Dorothy, she said softly, don't forget, this isn't just about protection. It's about reclaiming your name before they redefine it. After the call, I stood by the window, the late light slanting across the room. Outside, the trees had started to turn amber, copper, soft gold. Change always begins quietly, I thought, like this. I opened my notebook and wrote the day's final line. October 6th, with truth comes peace, but also responsibility. Then I closed it, feeling both heavier and freer at once. The next 2 weeks unfolded like slow-moving fog, each day blurring softly into the next. I spent them gathering proof while pretending life hadn't changed. Every morning, I followed the same routine: tea, prayer, notebook, patience. I visited the senior legal clinic on Tuesday, as Helen advised. A young paralegal named Aaron greeted me kindly. You're doing the right thing, he said after reading my notes. Document everything, and don't sign a single page they bring you. His confidence steadied me, like a lighthouse reminding a small boat that the shore still existed. When I returned home that afternoon, I found Linda waiting on the porch, her car engine idled, just in case. Mom, she said, voice sweet but tight, you've been avoiding us. I smiled faintly. No, dear. I've just been busy learning. She blinked. Learning what? The value of silence, I replied. Her mouth twitched, uncertain whether I was teasing or warning. She followed me inside, glancing at the empty shelves. You're being dramatic, she said. We were trying to help you before something happens. You can't manage all this alone forever. I turned slowly, meeting her gaze. You mean before I die? The color drained from her face. Don't say that. Why not? I asked softly. You've already made arrangements for my things. Her jaw tightened. You're twisting this. No, I said. You already did. She muttered something about just wanting to make sure it's easier later, and left without finishing her tea. That night, I wrote in my notebook, October 9th. They confuse love with control. Must stay steady. The next morning, I received a letter from the bank confirming Linda's withdrawals $18,400 over the past 3 months. The numbers glared up at me like fingerprints. I filed it carefully in the bank evidence envelope. In the days that followed, the pressure grew more deliberate. Robert began stopping by unannounced, sometimes with small groceries, sometimes with paperwork. These are just forms, he'd say, setting them down. Nothing urgent. I'd smile and place them unopened in a drawer. One afternoon, he lingered longer than usual. You know, Mom, houses this old need upkeep. Maybe you should think about downsizing. I can help handle the sale. I looked at him, the son who once held my hand at the zoo when he was afraid of the lion's roar, and said gently, Robert, the only thing I'm selling is patience. He frowned. You're being stubborn. No, I replied, I'm being remembered. By the second week, even Emma noticed. She called one evening after school, her voice small. Grandma, why are Mom and Uncle Robbie so tense lately? I didn't answer directly, because adults forget what peace feels like. Sweetheart, promise me you'll never rush to own what doesn't belong to you, she said softly. I promise. That small truth, spoken without calculation, was enough to steady me for another day. Helen checked in daily. Together we visited the county office, confirming that no property transfer had been filed yet. The clerk, a tired woman with kind eyes, whispered, You're not the first parent to catch it just in time. We left with copies of the database entries showing my property untouched. Outside, Helen squeezed my shoulder. You've done well, Dorothy. They can't move forward without your signature now. I exhaled slowly, the way I used to after long hospital shifts, exhausted, but quietly proud. Still, the emotional weight didn't lift easily. Linda began leaving voicemails that alternated between guilt and anger. You're letting outsiders turn you against your family, one message said. We're your blood. I saved each recording, labeling them by date, not for vengeance, but for truth. The night before the family meeting I planned, I couldn't sleep. I laid everything on the kitchen table, the bank statements, the notarized draft, the log entries. They looked small and harmless under the lamplight, like relics of some strange faith in paper. I opened my notebook and wrote, 12 visits, 7 lies, $18,400 missing. Tomorrow, light will touch all of it. The next morning, I prepared the house for company, setting out Frank's old teapot and 2 candles. I chose calm, not confrontation. When Helen arrived to sit with me beforehand, she asked, Are you ready? I nodded. Truth doesn't need rehearsing, she smiled. Then let it speak. As I waited for my children to arrive, I looked around the living room, the same space where birthdays were celebrated, where Frank once fixed a leaky ceiling while Robert held the ladder. Everything they'd tried to claim suddenly looked smaller than what they'd already lost. I touched the watch on the shelf, the one Frank left me, and whispered, Wish me strength. Its ticking sounded like a heartbeat answering back. When the doorbell rang, I felt no fear, only clarity. I opened the door to find Linda clutching a folder and Robert standing behind her, hands in his pockets. We need to talk, she said. We do, I replied, stepping aside. As they entered, the scent of old wood and chamomile filled the room. The papers on the table waited quietly between us. For once, I didn't feel small or outnumbered. I felt anchored, a woman standing on the solid ground of her own truth, ready to let proof speak where emotion had failed. They sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same one where we'd once celebrated birthdays with cake and candles. Now the table was cleared, except for the folder I'd prepared, labeled, dated, and waiting. The air between us was tight but polite, the way people breathe when they know the truth has arrived before they're ready to meet it. Mom, Linda began, her voice rehearsed but trembling at the edges. We're just worried about you. You've been different since the temple retreat. I smiled faintly. I learned that silence reveals what noise hides. Robert shifted in his seat. We didn't do anything wrong, he said quickly. You're blowing this out of proportion. I nodded toward the folder. Then you'll have no trouble understanding these. I opened it slowly, sliding the first document across the table, the bank statement showing $18,400 in withdrawals. That's from my account, I said quietly. Both of your signatures appear here. Linda swallowed hard. We were just moving it into a joint fund, Mom. For expenses. Whose expenses? I asked. Yours, she said. We thought you'd appreciate less to manage. I didn't answer. Instead, I placed the access log from the safe deposit box beside it. You opened this on October 1st, while I was at the temple. Did you find the letter your father left? Her hands froze. We didn't read it, she whispered. Then you know what it said? No, she admitted. You just assumed it was permission, I said softly. Robert leaned back, crossing his arms. We're family. We shouldn't be treating each other like suspects. No, I said. Family should treat each other like witnesses to love, not its thieves. My voice stayed even, not raised, not pleading. Your father wrote that. Everything we earned should stay with the one who remembers why it was earned. I remember. Linda began to cry then quietly, the way proud people do when shame catches them off guard. Mom, we thought we were helping. You've been alone, and we didn't know how to make things easier. By erasing me? I asked. By deciding what mattered before I was done living? She covered her face. Robert's shoulders slumped. We messed up, he said finally. I took out the property draft next. This was found in my printer, I said. Dated the day before I came home. Did you plan to file it? Robert looked at Linda, but she couldn't meet his eyes. We were just getting things ready, he said weakly. I nodded. Then let me help you finish your preparation. I reached into my purse and placed another paper on the table, my lawyer's statement, signed and stamped. As of yesterday, all access to my accounts and property has been revoked. Any further action will be treated as fraud. They both stared at the document. Linda's tears stopped, replaced by disbelief. You called a lawyer? I called the truth, I said, and I asked it to stay a while. Silence filled the room, thick but not cruel. I poured tea, the same ritual I'd done since they were children, and the sound of liquid meeting porcelain broke the tension just enough for breathing. I'm not angry, I said finally. Anger wastes the kind of peace your father and I built together. But I won't let you rewrite my story while I'm still here to tell it. Robert lowered his gaze. What do you want us to do? I looked at both of them. Restore what you took, withdraw the transfer forms, and promise me something simple. No decisions about me without me. Linda nodded through tears. We'll fix it. I know, I said, but forgiveness isn't fixing, it's learning. I hope you do. We sat there in quiet understanding. The clock on the rife wall ticked softly, each second measuring not distance but return. For the first time in a long while, I saw my children not as intruders in my peace, but as people lost inside their own fears. I reached across the table, placing my hands over theirs. I love you both, I said, but love needs boundaries to stay true. Robert looked up, his eyes damp. You're stronger than I realized, Mom. I smiled. I always was. You just never had to see it. We ended the evening with paperwork signed, corrections made, and promises spoken, not grand ones, but human ones. When they left, Linda hugged me tightly and whispered, I'll make it right. Start with honesty, I said gently. It costs less than regret. After the door closed, I stood alone in the quiet house. The folder remained on the table, a record not of betrayal, but of balance restored. I placed Frank's watch beside it and whispered, We've done what needed doing. The ticking answered softly, steady, and alive, like a heartbeat at peace. The next morning felt different. The air inside the house was lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled after weeks of holding their breath. I brewed my tea, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the folder now sealed and tucked neatly beside the teapot. It wasn't evidence anymore, it was closure. 2 days later, I visited attorney Samuel Price, a calm man with silver hair and the patience of someone who has seen families fall apart and rebuild again. Helen came with me for company. She carried her tote, as always, filled with pens, reading glasses, and that quiet authority that never needed raising its voice. Mr. Price listened as I explained the situation. When I finished, he nodded thoughtfully. You handled this with remarkable restraint, Mrs. Whitmore. Most people come here with anger first, not proof. I smiled faintly. Proof is quieter, but it lasts longer. He drew up a new living trust, ensuring my home and savings could only be accessed by me or by an independent trustee of my choosing. This guarantees your autonomy, he said, sliding the pages toward me. It's not mistrust, it's protection. Helen leaned forward. It's wisdom, she added. I signed the papers, feeling the kind of strength that doesn't need applause. That evening, I wrote letters to Linda and Robert. Not to lecture, but to explain. I told them I loved them deeply, but that love must live with respect, not assumption. I wrote that forgiveness had already happened the moment truth was spoken aloud, but that rebuilding trust would take time and consistency. I ended both letters the same way. When you act in my name, do it with honesty or not at all. I mailed them the next morning. Within a week, Linda called. Her voice was different, quieter, slower, stripped of defense. "Mom, I read your letter," she said. "You were right. We didn't see what we were doing until it was too late." "Understanding comes after listening," I replied. "And listening begins when guilt stops shouting." She didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, "I've enrolled in a volunteer program at the temple. They need help with elder outreach. I think I need to learn what real care looks like." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "That's a good start." Robert visited the next day. He handed me a small envelope containing a bank statement. "All funds replaced," he said quietly. "And I've closed the joint account." I nodded, taking it without ceremony. "You've done the right thing." He looked around the house, eyes lingering on the empty shelf by the window. "It looks different now," he said. "Lighter somehow." I smiled softly. "That's because peace takes up less space than guilt." In the weeks that followed, I returned to my normal rhythm: morning prayers, temple visits, gardening on mild afternoons. I found comfort in routine, in small actions that didn't require anyone's permission. Helen often joined me for tea, and we laughed about how two widows had managed to outwit an entire generation of worry. "They underestimated the power of paperwork," she'd joke. "No," I'd say. "They underestimated the calm." Linda began to stop by again, not with folders or boxes, but with time. She brought Emma, who always carried her sketchbook. One afternoon, Emma drew a picture of me sitting on the porch, a notebook in my lap, a teacup by my side. Underneath, she wrote in small letters, "Peacekeeper." I tucked that drawing inside my journal. The temple invited me to speak at a senior workshop about financial awareness. I hesitated at first, not wanting to expose my story, but Helen encouraged me. "You won't be exposing," she said. "You'll be enlightening." I agreed. The day I spoke, I told the group, "It's not greed that breaks families first. It's assumption, the kind that believes elders are too fragile to notice. But we notice everything. We just choose grace before anger." The room was silent, and then a soft ripple of nods moved through the audience like a shared exhale. At home that evening, I wrote in my notebook one final entry for that chapter. "Truth handled gently becomes peace handled firmly." I placed the pen down and folded my hands over the page. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. The house was no longer quiet from absence, it was quiet from resolution. When I went to bed that night, I left the window open slightly. The soft hum of the city drifted in distant laughter, a passing train, a dog barking somewhere far away. I thought of Frank, how he used to say that life is like a current, you can't stop it, but you can decide how to stand in it. I whispered into the dark, "I'm standing steady now." 6 months later, the dogwoods around Asheville bloomed early, their petals soft as memory. I sat on the porch that morning, sunlight filtering through the leaves, a cup of tea warming my hands. The world had found its rhythm again, quiet, deliberate, alive. I'd stopped keeping the folder on the table. Proof had served its purpose. Peace had taken its place. Linda and Robert came over every Sunday now, sometimes together, sometimes separately. The tension that once lived in their voices had dissolved into careful affection. We didn't talk about the documents or the money anymore. We talked about real things: the garden, Emma's college essays, the weather. Healing doesn't need announcements, it just keeps showing up until it feels ordinary. Last week, Emma handed me a small box she'd made in her art class. "It's for letters you haven't written yet," she said. Inside, she'd placed a folded note. It read, "Thank you for teaching me that kindness can be strong." I smiled, tracing her handwriting with my thumb. It reminded me of Frank's steady script, unhurried, sure of itself. The temple remains part of my life. I still light a candle for Frank every Friday, the flame small but unwavering. Helen stands beside me when she can, our prayers blending like old songs. Sometimes, after service, I walk by the river and watch how the water moves around stones without breaking them. That's what forgiveness feels like, steady flow, gentle persistence. I keep Frank's watch on the nightstand now. It's ticking, a reminder that time isn't what heals. Truth does. The house feels full again, not with possessions, but with balance. I've learned that love needs boundaries, the way faith needs silence. Both give shape to what can't be spoken. When the evening light fades and the house grows still, I sometimes open my window and listen to the faint chorus of night insects. Their rhythm feels like gratitude, patient and small. I whisper, "We made it through. Thanks for listening." Share your story in the comments, your voice matters.